First exam's out of the way, it's done, it's all over, and I'm happy to say that I did get an A on my first exam. And now this is the first of many exams, so it's not anything to like celebrate, oh my god, he's gonna become a #1 surgeon in the world or anything. But it is a great start to medical school and I wanna maintain it. Now in this video, I want to show you some tips and tricks that I learned preparing for this first exam and how I want to maintain these habits and become very sustainable in it getting these grades. And it will show you guys also how to maybe utilize things that you might not have thought of in order to get a better grade in medical school. And if you are struggling in any way, please do reach out to other people for help. It's not a sign of weakness or anything like that. Everyone in medical school, as far as I know, is trying to help you. So with that being said, let's go through 5 things that I did to get an A in my first exam in medical school. First one right off the bat is contact your upperclassmen peers and resources for tutoring help. It will save your sanity. The upperclassmen have gone through this and they know what to expect on your exams. They know the flavors of every professor and they can try to pinpoint exactly what they want you to know to emphasize, the material that you need to go through in order to prepare for your exam, and all the resources that are available that will help you. Now I have some pictures here of Google Drive, the U Michigan Medical School, and Netter's Atlas for Human Anatomy. That one's a little specific to my current exam that I just took in anatomy, but I just want to go through each of them real quick. Google Drive is a great way for people to share resources. If someone has a study guide or an Anki deck that they made, they can easily share it out. And talk to your upperclassmen because sometimes they might have old stuff that they can give you in order to help prep for the exam. And another thing, especially these two are going to be especially for anatomy, the UMich and Netter's Atlas. UMich, if you just search up UMich anatomy on Google, you'll go to the UMich Med School website and they have practice questions for every part of the body. And honestly, they are great. They have clinical questions, which are what you will do in medical school. And the next one is Netter's Atlas for Anatomy. And this one is kind of overwhelming at the beginning. These pictures are incredibly detailed and there's a lot of lines going into every picture. But if you can read Netter's atlases and the Netter plates and all that, you'll be in great shape for anatomy. And these are just some of the resources that I used. I used particularly the study guide, clinical practice questions like from UMich, and I went through the anatomy Netter's Atlas extensively. And just going through this every day will help you get what you need to know. Now the next one is gradually reviewing. You have to take it one step at a time, one day at a time. I just have a picture of a calendar here, but use a calendar, use some sort of scheduling app in order to prep how you're going to study for the week, for the month, for the day, all the way up into the year until your exam. Now, what does this mean? Well, in my med school at least, every day we have something called a conference where we kind of review what we did in the dissection lab the previous day, and maybe they throw in some extra stuff that we need to know. So for that day, that conference is that day's new material. So if that's the day's new material, that's what we learned on that day, and that's what I'm going to study the next day. And then we keep rinsing and repeating. What we learn on Monday, I'll review on Tuesday. What we learn on Tuesday, I'll review on Wednesday, and go like that. And what this did to me was it made me not so stressed about, oh my God, I just learned all this material and I have to review that before tomorrow's conference. What helped me was that if there was a lot of material, maybe I split it up into 2 days. If there wasn't that much material, maybe I just get it over with on that day. But I made sure that I gave myself plenty of time and not enough extra stress on top of it, and overwhelm myself with all the material. And the weekends are definitely catch-up days. Use those weekends, don't slack off. Those weekends are the days where you need to make note of everything that you didn't understand and go through and review it so that you do understand. The weekends are also times for me where I was able to go to the anatomy lab and go review everything with my friends, the structures that we learned and everything that's relevant in our exam that was coming up. Now the next one is know your resources. I kind of mentioned this on point 1, but there's a lot of resources out there. And when you first come into med school, it's kind of overwhelming. There's just way too many resources, and you don't know what to use and what not to use. The professors will throw everything at you. The upperclassmen might give you some resources, and it's kind of our job as med students to figure out what we use, what's good for us, and what we need to just throw out and forget. I'm telling you now, don't use every resource out there. It's just way too many things. And if you burden yourself with using every single resource and answering every single question, you're going to get burned out and it's just not going to work out. So some things I have here are Anki. Lots of people use Anki, but I learned this the hard way. If you don't start Anki from day one, it's very hard to catch up and make up for what you need for the exam. So if you are planning to use Anki, make sure you start on it in day one and learn about Anki. Let me know if you want me to give a short introduction video on how to use Anki and some places where you can get some decks for free. Other things are practice questions. I did mention Michigan's website, but also contact upperclassmen. In my school, at least, there is this upperclassmen mentoring program where they kind of make a weekly video just reviewing, giving some practice questions that they made of the material that we went over. Try to use those practice questions as gauging what you know, what you understand, and how you can move forward with your studying. I did mention Netter, the textbook as well. Sometimes there's a clinical anatomy textbook. We also had histology and physiology in our exams, and they had their own separate textbooks. So go through the PowerPoints that they might show and make sure if they emphasize anything that's not that clear to you or it's not mentioned heavily in the PowerPoints or what they verbally said, go to the text, go to the index at the back, look up that phrase and go to the point in that book and read about it. I had multiple questions on my first exam that had diseases that we talked about in physiology, but that were not extensively mentioned on the slides. So I read through that in the textbook and was able to recollect that on the exam. I was like, yes, I recognize that. I know what they're talking about, and then able to easily answer the question from there. Lab outlines, if you have lab outlines that guide you through dissections, usually they're, from our school at least, they were Netter diagrams that were not labeled as fully, so they just showed you the important points of that. Use that as a way to guide what they want you to know and how they want you to piece it together. Usually it's in an order of like, okay, so this area has like a bunch of things, but this particular area has a pocket full of 3 important things that cross, and knowing those 3 important things are specifically outlined in that PowerPoint, in that slide, in that outline of what we need to know. And that just might be not mentioned anywhere else, but know that, and that's very specific to your school and what they want you to know. And finally, study guides. This is also a nod to the upperclassmen. If they have study guides that they're willing to share with you, use them. I think that's what ultimately saved me on this exam. Just use any available study guides available, because they condense the information that you need to know and put it in one place so you could always go back to it. Number 4 is independent versus group studying. Don't feel like you're missing out socially if you decide to do independent studying. For me personally, I don't like to do group studying until a few days before the exam. That's because during independent studying, I'm able to fully go solely into the content, go very focused into what I need to do. And then in the group setting a few days before the exam, I'm able to review the content with everyone and figure out the holes in my knowledge. And by doing that, you get to know what you're missing out and also what you need to improve on when you study alone to get the content that you missed. And this can point out a lot of resources that you might need to use later on. But I also think that group studying can be very challenging sometimes, because while it is in everyone's best intention, sometimes content just does not get through fast enough when you're group studying. There might be lots of questions going around. There just might be a lot of distractions. So I really do suggest independent studying before the exam, and once the exam comes closer, get into group studying. What that also means is that you need to be on top of the content in order to be ready for that group study. That means you need to be kind of prepared for the exam maybe 2-3 days before the actual exam in order to help everyone else in the group and get to know what you know when you're actually studying in that group. And finally, you will not know everything, and that is okay. At the end of the day, there's just way too much content. And honestly, I don't think professors actually expect you to know every single detail that they mention. And guess what? The exam's not going to cover every single detail. And so, what does that mean? There will be holes in your knowledge, and that is okay. You need to acknowledge those holes and try to get as much as you can out of it. But at the end of the day, you need to make educated guesses and use process of elimination on exam questions that you don't know about. I went into the exam thinking that I covered almost every topic, but then once the actual questions come in, I realized, I forgot this. I just don't remember the dermatomes of the foot or something like that, and how they relate to the nerves that pass through that area. So I had to use educated guesses of like, okay, the fibular nerve branches into 2 points, superficial and deep, and that means that if it passes through this area, that means that if the cut was here, like it couldn't be this nerve, like that. So I didn't know exactly how the fibular nerve went through that area, but I was able to use what I remembered from anatomy and the anatomy diagrams and try to make educated guesses in order to figure out what the answer to that question is. And that comes to the final point, is understand why rather than memorizing. If you understand why, you can easily answer almost every question, because just memorizing, brute force memorizing, will probably not get you far. Now, that it's not to say that there are some topics that you do need to memorize, like certain numbers or normal ranges and things like that. But if you understand why, why something is happening, why a certain process is happening, why a certain muscle group is interacting like in that way to cause a specific action, you can try to use that and figure out the answers to certain questions. So at the end, just breathe and you'll be fine. And now these are the tips that I used to get an A on my first med school exam. And I hope that these help you become a better studier, a better student, and hopefully you'll be able to use these practices on any test that you take in medical school, honestly, in any academic period in your life. And with that being said, that's about it. Thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe. I will be uploading every week, except possibly not on weeks where there's an exam, but I will just be busy during that time, being in group studying where I will try to review everything with everyone. And with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.